It's already 2:01, so I think we could just jump right in. We have worked on digitizing VM42, which is for improved agricultural land management. This is version 2.1. And we also have a special guest with us today, Kristof Bulkai, that will be talking about his process as a project developer. So before we move into the full-on presentation, the agenda that we have today is a little bit of information about Envision blockchain, a Guardian overview, recap of our previous webinars. We'll also talk about carbon credits and methodologies and what those two things are. Then we'll go into our policy development checklist, the improved agriculture management information, and an overview of our schemas and workflow, and a policy demo. So a little bit about Envision blockchain. Envision blockchain solutions builds applications for the Web3 space, and we focus on guiding organizations through 3 major milestones on their Web3 journey, like use case analysis, proof of concept development, and scale deployments. And since 2020, the open source Guardian, maintained by Envision blockchain with support from HBAR Foundation and Hashgraph, has utilized the hedera public network to enable transparent, auditable, and traceable documentation of the emission process and life cycle of these digital environmental tokens. And in 2021, leveraging its expertise, Envision blockchain introduced the Managed Guardian service, a SaaS solution tailored for the carbon market to simplify environmental application development, offering core Guardian features like the policy workflow engine. MGS launched in 2022, and it supports organizations in creating traceable environmental tokens on hedera's ledger and advancing our global sustainability efforts. This is a quick list of some of our previous webinars, but the list is extensive, and you can find all of this on our YouTube channel at Envision Blockchain. And before we move into information about carbon credits and methodologies, I'd like to pass the mic to Kristof Bulkai, that will be talking about his perspective as a project developer.
Hello, everybody. Nice to be part of this presentation. By way of introduction, we finance carbon projects and help to kick finance at the initial stage. And we have worked with a variety of methodologies, VM42 being the most suited to soil carbon. And from our perspective as a developer, there are lots of advantages, which include there is a very rigorous, scientifically rigorous methodology, but actually there is also, I would say, the key disadvantage in that it's quite expensive to administer. And if you think about the typical size of a farm, whether it's in the US, which is where you have the largest farms, a couple of 100 acres at best. In emerging markets, it's even smaller. Africa, even smaller, less than an hectare, depending on your unit usually, which means that taking individual projects through the VM42 methodology is expensive and time consuming, and you need a specialist, either scientist or consultant, to help you with it. So having taken a few projects through this methodology, we are very much actively looking for how this process can be simplified, made cheaper, more cost effective, to be precise, more streamlined. And that's why we're very excited about seeing how the methodology has been digitalized. So hopefully we'll be able to make use of it for smaller projects, reduce the cost of taking existing projects through the verification, and generally just making this market more efficient, reduce friction. So like you, very excited to see the demo, and just here to say that there is a real life requirement and need from us as project developers, or whether finance projects or actually take through the process of getting the verification, is a real life need for making the whole process more streamlined, more digital, which improves also the transparency, the traceability, and this is something that is very much due in carbon markets. Jaylene, I'm handing the microphone back to you. I can talk a bit more about the project, but I think at this stage, let's focus on your solution.
Thank you, Kristof, and we appreciate you being here and giving us that perspective. So this slide is going to cover a little bit of information about what a carbon credit is, in case you're not familiar with that, and what is a methodology. A carbon credit represents a measurable reduction or removal of 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide or its equivalent from the atmosphere. And it's usually awarded to projects that successfully reduce greenhouse gas emissions and provides a way to offset emissions and support environmental sustainability. And when we talk about methodologies, these are outlines and requirements, as well as the calculations that you need to conduct in order to get that quantification of the emission reductions and the removals that are associated with your project. Out there are probably over 400 methodologies available, and it depends on the type of project activity that you have. There's some that are very complex, some are not as complex, but the one we'll be seeing today, I would say, is fairly complex and difficult to understand if you're someone who's new to this space and maybe you're not familiar with how to dissect all of these PDFs and all the information that's stored in there. So when we start developing these policies, we usually go through this checklist, and we've outlined these steps for you if you're interested in developing your own policy or you're just interested in seeing how we do this. So the first step is always research and preparation. This means that we have to go through all of the PDFs required, whether it's the methodology PDF. We've started making it our standard to also implement the templates that are associated with certain registries. So all of that requires research so that you know what's going into the policy that you're creating. Maybe you're also researching the different options that you have available for your specific project activity, researching the registries that you'd like to follow in their business approach. And that moves you into step 2, which is selecting the right methodology for your project and your application. Then we move into workflow research. So this just goes back to what are the usual steps that a project developer has to follow? What are the steps that the admin follows as a registry? And maybe even the steps that are required from a validator or verifier. Step 4 here is to map the quantification approach. So this is when we open up that PDF for the methodology. In this case, it would be VM0042 version 2.1. And we start looking at all the calculations that are mapped in there. And in order to send this information to someone like a software developer who can start creating this policy, we use an Excel template that we've created here with the Guardian. And what we're outlining in there is what are all the required fields that we need to collect as inputs? What are all the parameters or variables that are associated with that equation that's outlined in the PDF? And even what are the expected outputs that we want to calculate using the Guardian's calculation engine. And the 6th step here, which is the last part, is converting all of that information that you've dissected. You've created a workflow. It can be something that you create in PowerPoint or just an image that you create outlining all the steps and actors that you're expecting, and that Excel template that outlines all the field requirements, your schema requirements, calculations that you want included in your policy. And you can move all of this into the policy workflow engine, where you create the full-on policy that includes the workflow, it includes your calculations, and all of your actors. So now we're moving into information that's specific for projects that are associated with VM0042. So this is focused on improved agriculture land management, and this refers to a set of sustainable farming practices designed to enhance soil health, increase productivity, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions while maintaining or improving your yields. These practices are commonly incorporated into carbon credit methodologies as a means of generating verifiable emission reductions or removals. And some key practices that we can see in projects like these are conservation tillage and no-till farming, cover cropping, crop rotation, and diversification, agroforestry, nutrients management, and even things like organic amendments so that you move away from those synthetic fertilizers. With these credits, there's also certain sustainable development goals that can be related to the specific project. And with projects that are focused on land management, you can see things like zero hunger, good health and well-being, climate action, and life on land, since you are increasing the biodiversity. So schema is a term that we tend to use a lot. And when we talk about a schema, this is specifically what we're creating. This is using our Guardian Excel template. But this is just a quick overview since it's a screenshot of the actual one that we've created. But moving into that Excel, when we talk about schemas, we're outlining all of the requirements from the user. These can be requirements that are focused on your PDD, like a project description template, the validation reports, verification reports, or the calculations and all the information that's outlined in the methodology PDF. So this specific Excel is focused on just VM42. This is not including the project description templates. There are separate Excels that we've created for that. But in here, we can just quickly see what type of information we're collecting. So here we have different columns, like if we want this field to be required, where we answer yes or no. The field type, which just means what is the rule or type of information that we want to collect from this specific fields, whether it's a help text, we have enums that are the different options we could offer the user, string that they can put in paragraphs of information. It can be strictly a number. And if we move into the next column here, we have our parameter. This is where we collect the different enum options that are separated into different sheets. And all of this is extracted by the Guardian when we import this schema. It can reference the specific sheet that you're referencing here and pull all of those options into the Guardian schemas and the UI. Here we have the visibility column, and what we do with that is we can hide certain things from the user, so it's still included in the verifiable credential, which is a document that is visible to the user after you submit these documents. And here, the reason why we would hide something like this is because it's automatically determined based off of what the user is selecting up here. And you can see that we also have some statements like true or false. So depending on what they select here in the quantification approach, we can go ahead and determine if this subschema here is applicable or not. In the next column is the question. This is just where we can go ahead and put the parameter, or maybe we can put in a description of that parameter so that the user knows what it is that we're collecting at that point in the form. We have options to allow multiple answers, which is just a simple yes or no that you can select here, and the answer column. And again, what we're trying to do with this Excel is just outline everything that's included in the schemas for the Guardian so that we could easily import it and use that within our policy. And here I'll just quickly go through some of the other sheets that we have. So all of this is used for the calculations where we'll have the leakage, all of the different quantification approaches. There could also be tools in here. So now we'll go back. We'll take a deeper look at that when we move into the demo and we can see the schemas within the UI as well. Here we have the VM42 workflow, and this is what I was mentioning when I say that you can use something like PowerPoint or anything to create an image to outline what is the expected flow that you want in this policy, what are the different actors, ultimately to get to the credit issuance. So the first step that we've put into this policy is creating roles, and this means that you can create a role as a project proponent and complete a registration form. The admin can go ahead and approve or reject that project proponent. The same thing goes for the VVBs, and you can have a separate account for a validator and a separate account for a verifier, but they would go through the same flow of just creating their account and completing a registration form. Then the admin can go ahead and approve or reject that validator or verifier account. This moves into the project proponents, what's required of them to continue moving forward through the policy. So here they can go ahead and submit their project description, their emission reductions, which can be estimated at that point in time. And they can also submit a monitoring report if they're ready for that and their project has already started applying the different activities. Then we move into the validation and verification stage. So this is again dependent on if this monitoring report was submitted or not. Assuming that it hasn't, then this would mean that a validator would go ahead and check the project description, the calculations, and submit a validation report. But if there is a monitoring report submitted, then they can also submit a verification report. This is just outlining what I previously said about if there is no monitoring report. So assuming that one wasn't submitted, then again, we can go ahead and have the verifier submit their verification report at this point in time. Now moving to step 9, anything that the project proponent has submitted and the BBBs have submitted are all visible to the administrator. So this would be things like the project description, validation report, monitoring report, verification report, and the emission reductions and removals calculations that are captured in a specific schema. In step 10 here, the admin can review all of those documents and approve them, or they can reject them, and this can stop the flow there if there are no corrections made by the project proponent or the validator or verifier. But assuming that everything is approved, and as soon as that verification report is approved, that would trigger the issuance of credits. So here, this is an image that is sourced from the VM0042 version 2.1 PDF, and Verra has gone ahead and outlined the different quantification approaches, the equations that are used for specific activities, and GHGs that we're trying to quantify. So we have approach 1, which is the measure and model, approach 2, measure and remeasure, and approach 3, which is default factors. So in this policy, we have gone ahead and included every single one of these quantification approaches and their equations. But depending on what the user selects as to what they're including and not including in their project activities, we can also determine which approach we need them to provide data for. Now here we can see a quick video of the schema trees, and this is something we could look at within Guardian as well when we move into the demo. But this is the schema tree for the GHG emissions and any of the carbon pools. And you can see the different decision flows and how they're all influenced by their sub-schemas as well. So depending on whether you're taking approach 2 or approach 1 for your soil organic carbon, then there's specific sub-schemas that you would need to fill out as well. And now be moving away from this presentation, we can go ahead and go right into the Guardian. This is specifically Managed Guardian service that we'll be using today. So before we move into the specific policy, I think it's good to go through different tabs that we have here. So the first thing that we'll usually see when we create an account is our profile. You'll see your username, your password, your tenant ID, information associated with hedera like your account ID, user topic, initialization topic, and your HBAR balance. And documents like your DID, you'll see the VC document for your DID here. And we can also open up what you would have filled out if you were an organization. So here I just have some basic information for my account, but we would collect things like your organization name, your address, city, country, postal code, website, email, and it's optional to put in anything like a tag or ISIC code. Then we have the policies, and within the policies dropdown, you'll see the schemas, artifacts, modules, your policies tab where you can go ahead and start them and use them, your tools and schema rules. So I'll go ahead and click on the schemas, and I've already imported VM42 version 2.1. I also have version 1, which was one that we've previously digitized. We had a different approach for that one, but we'll be doing a comparison of that today as well. So here we can specifically filter for what policy we want to see the schemas for. I'm selecting version 2.1 that we're focusing on today. And here you'll see everything that was created. This is all the schemas we've outlined in that Excel template. At the very bottom, you can see the total number, and we have 167. So here what I'll quickly show is that schema tree again, and that was specifically for the yearly GHG emissions. Here we go. So to open that up, you click on this menu here and we can select tree. And we'll be able to see the schema tree here and the decision flows. So at the very top, we have the yearly GHG, which is that overarching schema. We have the different quantification approaches right under it. And when we move to the third level there, we're looking at schemas that are specific for a unit. Depending on how many units you have, you would fill out that schema multiple times. We have the quantification approaches, then starting the calculations for that specific unit, whether it's baseline emissions, your project emissions, and there's also calculations coming from AR tool 14 that we see at the very right side there. There's also calculations for leakage here, and a lot of the decision flows towards the bottom are coming from the AR tool 14. So you'll see things like the double sampling, the carbon stock in trees at a certain point in time. And if I close this back up, we can also take a look at the schema tree for a specific quantification approach. So here we could look at quantification approach 3, the default factors, and the tree associated with that one. Now, if I were to open any one of these, let's see, we can go ahead and click on that edit button, and we see what's captured in that specific schema. So this is the baseline nitrification and denitrification of nitrous oxide emissions. We see that we have a variable that's being collected here, and it is hidden from the user because it has a calculation embedded within the policy where it'll go ahead and reference different values, whether it's an input or it was already calculated. We can go ahead and create that logic within the policy itself. And something else that we can do here is compare different schemas. So as I mentioned before, we have digitized version 1 previously, but we did take a different approach of having a scenario-based example where this version now is fully complete with all the equations and all of the requirements. So in order to compare the schemas, we can go ahead and select the policy, and we can select the specific schema we want to take a look at. So here we can look at what did we include in our project description before, and what was included in the project description, which is now following the project description template version 4.4 for VM42 version 2.1. And at the very top, similarity scores. We can see that to the left, we have the old version, to the right is the new version. And we see that there's just certain things popping up in red. That just means that there is no match found within the new version. It could be things like the naming is different, the way that we're putting in the name for the keys are different. If we open these up, that we're adding things that are a bit more descriptive. We have a lot more help text within these templates than we did before. But really, you can just go ahead and take a look at the comparisons, open up each one of these fields, and you can see what it's asking for where it previously wasn't. And if we go a little further down here, let's see what's at the very bottom. You'll just see that there's a lot that exists now in this template that we didn't have before, since this is all showing up as empty. But again, you can open each one of those and see what's the description, which is the field that we're collecting from the user. So now I'll be moving into the policies tab, and here we have 2 policies already imported, new version. This is the old version. One of them is already in dry run. That just means that we can go ahead and access all of the different users, play as if we're their role, and go ahead and submit information for all of them without having to log in and out of this specific standard registry account. And this is something that you can do when you're testing out the policy. You don't have it for a real project at the moment, and it's not, the transactions are not going onto Hedera's mainnet. So everything here is on testnet, and we can easily run through this policy and see what it looks like without having to fully commit to it. So following the workflow, the first thing I do here is go ahead and create a user. We'll see that we have virtual user 1, and if I select this button again, I have now virtual user 1 and virtual user 2. So I'll move into virtual user 1, and now they're being prompted to select a role. This could be the project proponent or the VVB role. And keeping in mind that for the VVB, you can have a validator choose this role, or you could have a verifier choose this role, and they can have their own accounts. So as soon as I click next, I'll be prompted to submit this form. This is a registration form. And usually you would just go ahead and fill all of this out, but for this demo, I'll run through it a bit quicker. And I have these different text files with sample data that'll go into each one of these fields. And so here I've added that sample data using this console tab here. And we see all of that being placed into the schemas and their fields. So what we're collecting here is things like your email, telephone, address, what your name is, account manager and their job title, the website, the email, things like your fax, telephone, and the organization's address. Then we could go ahead and submit that. Now we'll see that it's currently waiting for approval, and that's approval from the administrator. So if we go to the administrator's account here, we'll see that under the project proponent, there's currently someone here waiting to be approved. We can view that document with all of the information that was submitted by the project proponent in their registration form. And you can select the approve or the reject button. They're both clickable. Now, if we move into virtual user 2, now we can select to have a VVB as the role. And we would go ahead and do the same thing for this verification form. They're slightly different in what they're asking for in this first field here. But everything else is fairly similar with the organization information and the person in charge here, their information. And so we've gone ahead and filled those fields. We'll click submit. Again, we're waiting for approval from the administrator. So you can't move forward within the different steps that you have as a project proponent or a VVB unless the administrator approves your account. Again, we can see the document that was submitted. You can view this as a form, and you can also view this within the code view. And we'll go ahead and approve that. And now that they've both been approved, they both have access to the different steps that we have outlined in the policy. So this is the project proponent role, which you can see here at the top right. And if we go to the VVB, you can also see that now they have their different steps here. So now what we're creating is really the project description template. And again, I'll be pasting in that data to save us some time. So you'll see this is all the data that I'll be bringing into the form. And now if we quickly glance at what we have in here, we have information that's focused just on general project information. We are tracking all of the documents using a project ID. We have information like the project details here, eligibility, but essentially we're capturing everything that is included in the project description template for the VCS program, and this is version 4.4. There are also specific schemas that you can go ahead and add multiple values for. So for example, here we have the estimated GHG emission reductions or removal schema, and depending on how many years your accrediting period has, then you can go ahead and outline the specific period. This can be just a year like this, or you can also have information that would be maybe a little bit more descriptive with the month, the date, and the year. But keeping in mind that for this demo, we try to put in information that's realistic, especially for the calculation schema, but all of it is really some demo values. Okay, and I'll just go all the way to the bottom here, where we can go ahead and click the Create button. Okay, so here we see the project description and the specific project that we just registered, or not registered, but submitted the form for, which we can open that form up again. So this is for some images that I have in here that are not updated. For example, this one. But if we were to fill this out, this form regularly, and go ahead and embed it in image, you wouldn't see something like this. You would see the preview of that image. And this same document that's already been filled out is something that we can go ahead and assign to a validator. We can now move into the next step, which is the ESM interpolations. We'll add some data to this, but what we're really trying to get out of this is the average value here for each one of these stratums. But let's go ahead and fill it out and then see the results. So here we have information for the stratum ID, the reference, soil mass, the SOC model, unit ID, the type, and profile ID, and you can go ahead and keep adding these depending if it's by profile ID or if it's by year. When we submit this, it automatically starts calculating some values. So if we open it back up, we'll see that we'll get this average that'll be referenced when we're doing our calculations. So now we'll move into the emission reductions calculations. And in this data sample, and we'll be sharing this data sample with everyone in our methodology library as well when we upload this. But what we've included in here is one unit ID and 1 year, but we have enabled it where you can go ahead and add different units. So for example, we have a unit outlined here. We have the quantification approach that they're following, and we can also add a different quantification approach for a different unit. We can also add several years because we've created this overarching schema that's based off of the year. So you'll see that we outline the year here, and you can put it as 1, 2, 3, or you can put it as a legitimate year like this. And then we have data for the different quantification approaches that we're collecting. Everything that's required has this little asterisk here that's in red. And if you had nothing in that field, then you wouldn't be able to submit this form. And here we're collecting different information, making sure that we're filling everything out that's needed in order to calculate the emission reductions at the end, the amount of credits that you need to receive. There's also tools that have been created in here, like AR Tool 14. And being that everything has been filled out, we can go ahead and select Create. And then just for clarity too, all the information that you're submitting in there is what you would consider an input value. You don't have to calculate it before you're able to fill out this form and give us the outputs as well. All we're asking for are the inputs, and the Guardian will go ahead and calculate that for you. So here now we're seeing what we just filled out in this emission reductions form. We can open up the document and see all the information that's in there. We can see certain results that are coming back, like the methane emission reductions from the soil organic carbon pool. And we go all the way to the bottom here. You'll see that we have certain fields that were hidden from the user, and there's hidden fields all over this document that will show up once you submit the form. But what we're always really looking for is this net GHG emission reductions and removal. So we know the year, and the Guardian will go ahead and pull up this value for you based off of the year that you've identified in the schemas above. We have the emission reductions for that specific year that's outlined right above it. The carbon dioxide removals, leakage, the estimated net GHG emissions, and these are all associated with specific equations within the PDF itself. And then we also have the calculation of the verified carbon units. So this is how many VCUs you would have received if you're registering this with Verra. And following their approach, we've included those calculations as well. And then ultimately you'll see the amount of credits that you would have received that your verifier would go ahead and check and approve. And then here we can assign this to the validation third party or the verification third party, depending on where in the project activities and where in the specific part of the flow you are already in. But from everything that we've submitted right now, this would be considered the validation step. If you were already implementing the different activities, you could go ahead and move into the monitoring report section and create that. But we'll move into this VBB account. Here we see the project description that was submitted. They can open that document. And again, we'll have those errors for the images that were embedded in here. And we can approve it. They'll also see the emission reductions. They can see the same BC document that we were looking at before and approve that. And since no monitoring reports have been submitted, there would be nothing in here, but they could go ahead and submit their validation report. And here we'll put this information in here again. And it's very important to make sure that when you are testing this out for yourself and playing around with the policy, you want to make sure that the project IDs are all the same so that when we create the trust chain, all of the documents are reflecting in there correctly. And so this validation report is also following the VCS validation report template. We'll go ahead and submit that. And by assigning this back to the project proponent, it allows them to view it. They can't alter it in any way. And we can go ahead and take a look at that. So if we move into the validation reports, you'll see that they can see that this was submitted. They can see the history there, but you can't go ahead and edit this document. And by going to the admin account here, now they would be able to open up this tab here with the project descriptions. They can see the status and they can ultimately approve it or reject it. Same thing for basically every document that's been submitted. So this is the emission reductions. They can open that up and approve or reject. There's no monitoring report submitted, so there'd be nothing in there yet. And we have the validation report in here. They can see that it's waiting for approval and the status. They see who did it, and they have all the information that was submitted, and they can approve or reject that. And so some of the last things we'll do here is just go ahead and submit a monitoring report, but I did want to show you that we have a certain feature when you are in dry run, and you'll see at the very top, this is in dry run mode. You can test this document out with test data by just simply clicking on this test button. And if maybe you were testing out this policy, you want to run through it really quick, you can go ahead and use those test buttons. And again, just make sure that your project IDs are in line with all the other documents you've submitted. But when you do move into the real life application of this and you're on mainnet, that's not, you wouldn't see that test button at the very top. Here we'll go ahead and assign that. And if you did have multiple accounts for the VBBs, maybe you have one for a validation stage, one for verification stage, you would see the different options down here under the assign drop down. So let's go ahead and go back to the VBB here. We can see the monitoring report that was submitted. And this is just all the test data that came in with the test button. We can approve that. And then we would go ahead and submit a verification report. The project proponent is also allowed to submit another emission reductions. Maybe the first one had estimated values and they have their real life values now, so they can go ahead and resubmit that and reassign it to a verifier. And here for the verification report, I'll be adding data again. Now, when we are issuing credits, it is based off of this report here, and whatever the BVB says that you have in verified emission reductions is what we'll be seeing when we mint the credits at the very end here. But really the field that we're looking at is here, which would be the total VCUs is what we'll see being minted. So we'll go ahead and submit that verification report. We want to, again, assign it so that the project proponent can view this information. And we can navigate to their account really quick and see that they have that verification report there now, and they can view that document. And the last step here is to go ahead and make sure that we have all of these things approved in the admin account. We've already approved the project description, the emission reductions. If there was a second one submitted, you would see that here, or as many as you have submitted. The monitoring report can be approved here. They can also view that document. And you could still view that document after you've approved it as well. The validation report was already approved, and then we have our verification report. So as soon as we click on this approve button, we'll see that these credits will start to mint. As soon as you get that notification, if you go to the VP here and open up the trust chain, you'll see where in the process that is. So we have a total here of 40,000. It's currently minted this many, although we are in dry run, so everything here is not for a real use case at the moment. And we have the token transfer. So as soon as all of your tokens have minted, the token transfer would start. But in this trust chain, you can see information associated with the token. You see the verified signature. You can also see the policy name, the description, the version. So as I've mentioned before, we're in dry run, and the issuer name. And then at the very bottom, we have these different cards that show you all of the steps we've taken, who that party is. And you can also open up these VC files, which are all the documents that we've been submitting all the way to credit issuance. So you'll see that we've submitted everything like the monitoring report, emission reductions, validation report, verification report, and the tokens minted. And this VC file here would just have the ID, the issuer, issuance date and time, the proof. Again, we have the date down here, the amount, and the token ID. And I see that we have a question that says, how do you use the template or pull it into a policy? So once you've created those templates, and they're all things that exist within your schemas tab, when you're creating these policies, there are places for you to reference those schemas. So if we jump into one of these forms, you'll see that here we have, I can't click on it because we're in dry run, but we have a schemas section. You'll see the drop down with all of the schemas that you can reference, and you would go ahead and bring that in. So at that certain step in your policy workflow, the user would be able to submit that form. And now one of the last things I wanted to show before we close out for today is that we have, again, the old version that is in our methodology library, and version 2.1 will be in our methodology library very soon. But if we click on the compare button here, we can go ahead and take a look at what those differences in the workflows look like, specifically the workflow that's created for the policy itself. So we see version 1 is the base policy, and we'll compare it with this new one and click on that compare button. So at the very top, you always get that similarity score, just like when we compared schemas. You can open up and see the different roles. So even things like naming will show up here. So we have the project proponent with that underscore there, and then we have project proponent to the right. BBBs are staying the same. If you had different roles, you would also see that. So maybe you had a stakeholder role that you wanted to include in your policy, you would see that third role outlined here where the other one might only have two. But again, we have the old one here to the left, new version to the right. And we'll see that before we had started with the flow for the admin. Now the flow starts with the project proponent. There's also things like these tools that don't exist in the previous policy. And you'll see everything in red was not in this policy and not in that step. We used to have the project proponent as the second step here, but those things, you would still have the ability to move through the workflow, even if you started with the admin or if you started with the project proponent when you're building out your policy. But what really matters is the different blocks that we have included, the different schemas that are being referenced that we have included, the token information. And even all of the steps that are included for the VBB now. Like before, we didn't have validation reports that could be submitted, verification reports that could be submitted. There was just approval buttons and rejection buttons as well. So you can see that we have a button down here. We have the approve report button, but now you're not just selecting approve, you're going ahead and submitting those validation templates and verification templates as well. So if we have any questions, now's a great time to go ahead and add that to the chat and we can get those answered. And perfect timing here, we have that our credits completed their mint, and I think the transfer is starting. So if we were to go back, and something else too is that we can access the trust chain from the administrator role or from the project proponent role. So here we're going ahead and opening that VP again to see the difference in there, but we see that now our token amount is 40,000. That's already completed mint. And we also have the transfer here that has started. All right, the last thing here is if we have any questions that maybe come up after the webinar, a good way to reach out to us is through GitHub. Maybe you have a policy request, enhancement, or you're reporting a bug. We also have discussions that go on in there. You can also reach out to us on Discord, and this is specifically through Hedera and their sustainability channel, or you could directly reach out to us at Envision through our email, which is support@guardianservice.io, or through our website and our contact page. But thank you everyone for joining, and I look forward to hearing more if you have a chance to play around with this policy and maybe you have some feedback that you'd like to contribute. But thank you all for joining.